Crystal balls continue to fly as the dead period comes to a close. Our analysts are making predictions, and just a tip, fans of Georgia, Auburn, Arizona, and Utah, you will definitely enjoy this show. Plus, we are resetting the recruiting board out west. That's where the top uncommitted quarterback in the nation resides. Who's interested? We'll tell you. And SEC Media Days are wrapping up. We're talking NIL, the Jimbo Petrino dynamic, and who is the ruler of the soon-to-be extinct SEC West. All that and more as the college football recruiting show starts right now. Alongside Blair Angulo, I am Emily Proud. A reminder to submit your questions in the chat. We'll take some at the end of the show. The only way you can be a part of the chat is by subscribing to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Also, please like this video so we know that you're watching. As we are getting dangerously close to the month of August, we thought it would be helpful to remind you who the top 10 teams are in the recruiting ranking. So here is that top 10. You got Georgia right there, number 1, Ohio State, Florida, Michigan, Alabama, USC, Penn State, A&M, Notre Dame, and Oregon rounding out the top 10. But Blair, still a lot to be decided.
A lot to be decided. The number that sticks out to me there, Emily, is 14 commitments only for Alabama, and they're already a top 5 class. There are 50, or actually more than 50 schools that rank below Alabama but have more commitments. So that kind of says everything you need to know about the Crimson Tide, and I think that would probably be the lowest that we'll ever see them in the rankings as we make that charge towards the early signing period.
Yeah, that should be scary. Talk about quality over quantity right now, but we know that they will finish out rounding out that class. Let's go ahead and hit some of the headlines and what happened in the recruiting world this week. And how about them Vols? Tennessee landing 5-star wide receiver Mike Matthews last night. The Georgia native picking the Vols over in-state Georgia. You got Clemson and USC. Our director of recruiting, Steve Wiltfong, writes that this is just the start for Heupel this cycle. Blair, what does a win like this mean for the Big Orange?
It means that if things stay as they are in the rankings and Mike Matthews remains one of those truly elite 5-star wide receivers in this class, Tennessee would sign at least one 5-star prospect in back-to-back classes for the first time since 2014 and 15. So the Josh Heupel effect is very, very real.
All right, Oklahoma adding to their 2024 class this week, landing a commitment from 4-star wide receiver Zion Raggins, also a Georgia native. He picked the Sooners over Georgia, Florida State, among others. What can he provide to the future of the Oklahoma offense?
Speed and elusiveness. It's going to give OU an open field menace. Zion has a 10.4 100-meter time to his name this year, so if he can fly, that's going to be his calling card for the Sooners once they start matching up in the SEC.
The number 3 recruiting class is just getting stronger. Florida with a big win on the trail, flipping 4-star wide receiver TJ Abrams from Florida State. We love the rivalry there, Blair. What did Billy Napier just add with him?
Abrams is one of those specialty slot wide receivers that is becoming super important for every offense across college football. He's got terrific speed and short area quickness. Plus, Emily, it's a flip. So Billy Napier is adding another in-state win to his bag.
And a rare Georgia decommitment as 4-star safety Jaylen Heyward changed his mind and has reopened his recruitment. The Florida native had been committed to the Bulldogs since January. Now, he did take some official visits to UCF and Miami back in June. Let's get some more details from our expert. It is time now for the Wiltfong Whip Around with our director of recruiting, Steve Wiltfong. Steve, you turn back time to June. We did discuss Heyward's visit with Mario Cristobal and the likelihood of a potential flip. Now that he's back on the market, where do things stand?
Well, Miami's certainly one of the schools still in the equation for Jaylen Heyward. He also said that he's strongly considering USC, Michigan, UCF, Clemson, and Auburn. Miami and UCF both got official visits in June. He also said Georgia still remains in the mix for him moving forward. Georgia may also struggle, Emily, to hang on to Peyton Woodyard long-term, another top 247 safety. But if they can land the number 1 safety in the country, KJ Bolden, I think they will, but they're battling Ohio State and Florida State, among others. all's well with the nation's #1 recruiting class.
I think they're doing all right. You're about to tell us more positive news for Georgia, too, because you made 2 crystal ball picks for them to land 5-star Justin Williams, the linebacker, and then 4-star running back Nate Frazier. So what has you leaning the Dogs with those 2 blue chippers?
Yeah, well, with Justin Williams, I had an early crystal ball pick dating last fall for Oregon, and the Ducks are still strongly in the mix for Justin Williams, having regular communication with him and his family. But 2 visits to Georgia this calendar year, including his official visit in June, time spent with Glenn Schumann, Fran Brown, the Georgia players, and the commits, including his teammate, Joseph Jonah Ajanye. I think that he feels most comfortable with Georgia, and the intel favors the Bulldogs right now, going into his commitment, which is slated for next Monday night. And then with Nate Frazier, teamed up with our colleague Greg Biggins, 24/7 Sports national analyst from out west. Nate Frazier has taken several visits, but Georgia got an unofficial visit late in the summer. That was one where the intel started to favor the Bulldogs coming out of that trip. He still got an official visit in play that he's going to use for a Georgia game this fall. The relationship with Del McGee, what they've done with running backs, what they've done as a program as a whole, I think has put Georgia in the driver's seat as they battle places like Alabama and Oregon moving forward.
All right, and Steve, you have an update on the 5-star edge Colin Simmons. The crystal balls seem to be split here between Texas and LSU. What's the latest on the Duncanville prospect?
Well, we just came up on my 1-year anniversary of having a 24/7 Sports crystal ball forecast in favor of LSU. So I've long thought that the Tigers were in great position. They've got him and his family on campus a ton, most recently for the spring game in Baton Rouge, where he got to rub elbows with the likes of Angel Reese and Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, and had a great time. And this recruitment, at least the intel I'm getting, is so fluid that I told our producer Sanle, as we were preparing for this whip around, that I was close to moving my prediction to Texas. And there is a lot of people that spent time with Colin Simmons on his official visit in June, and have also been kind of keeping tabs of the recruitment behind the scenes, that think that Texas has moved into pole position. But LSU is slated to get him back on campus this next weekend, and there are still some people that believe that he could ultimately end up at LSU. Emily, Colin Simmons tweeted on Wednesday that a decision's coming soon. This visit to LSU could be his last one, and so I'm going to hold the LSU pick through the visit, and then we'll see what happens between Texas and LSU with other programs like Miami, Oregon, Texas A&M, Alabama, SMU, some of the others that he is strongly considering here late in his process.
It's fluid. That's why we don't put these picks in Sharpie. Speaking of the aforementioned producer, Sanle, he's in my ear right now asking us to ask you to hit that like button if you have not already. Steve, what does it look like? Yep, just a thumbs up. Go ahead. Speaking of, we got more crystal ball picks to discuss for more guys with the last name of Simmons. You like Auburn to land the 3-star athlete Malcolm Simmons. What led you to that pick?
Well, talking to a source with knowledge of Malcolm's recruitment, he told me that Auburn is the program to beat. He recently put out a top 7 that also included Auburn, Indiana, West Virginia, UCF, Coastal, and Liberty. But he's expected to be at Big Cat Weekend this coming weekend, and I think that Auburn is the one to beat for one of the top offensive players in the state. Emily had 753 yards rushing, 513 yards receiving as a junior, with 18 total touchdowns there. He's a 23-foot long jumper, 6'6" high jumper, so a lot of upside there, a dynamic playmaker. I think he'll ultimately end up with Auburn here, perhaps at Big Cat Weekend.
Ooh, Big Cat Weekend sounds like a lot of fun. While we're on the topic of Auburn, where do they stand with 4-star Georgia commit DeMarcus Riddick?
Well, we've talked about DeMarcus Riddick a lot on the show. We know that we are not expecting him to stick with Georgia going into his commitment, his final commitment later this month. But a lot of our conversation is centered around Alabama, and I think there has been times where Alabama has certainly picked up steam with DeMarcus Riddick after getting into Tuscaloosa a couple times. But I talked to a couple sources this week that feel like Auburn has as good a chance as any program, and one source thinks that Auburn may actually be the one to beat here. So this is one that's going to be very exciting to follow as we go into the final week of DeMarcus Riddick's recruitment here in Auburn. I know this. There's not a program recruiting him harder right now than the Tigers, and they should not be slept on here for one of the state's best too, as Big Cat Weekend and the end of summer approaches.
All right, that was a lot of SEC talk. Let's go to the Big Ten. James Franklin has the nation's number 7 recruiting class and could add 2 more to that over the weekend. You got top 247 lineman Liam Andrews. He's announcing his decision right here on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel, and Penn State is a finalist for him. Also, Miami Central defensive lineman T.A. Cunningham is scheduled to announce his college plans on Saturday. So how confident are you that Franklin could land both of these top prospects?
Yeah, I feel good about Penn State going into both of those young men's announcements. James Franklin and company looking for their 3rd top 10 recruiting class since they've gotten to Happy Valley, and these 2 guys would go a long way. Liam Andrews being recruited as a defensive lineman by Penn State. I don't think there's a program recruiting him harder right now. He's also strongly considered South Carolina and Wisconsin, but when I talk to sources around that recruitment, Penn State is the heavy favorite there. And 24/7 Sports national analyst Brian Doan also likes Penn State for Liam Andrews. And then T.A. Cunningham, talked to him this week. He has been to Happy Valley twice, including his official visit. And he's emphasized how it's a place where you can really go and focus on football, but also the development of young men off the field also stands out to him and his family. James Franklin has particularly made a big impression on T.A. Cunningham, and just their style of play on defense, the way they run around, the hard-nosed physical attacking style that Penn State has speaks to him. So I think that they are also the heavy favorite going into his announcement on Saturday. Penn State, they got a lot of blue chippers on the board moving forward, so we'll see how high they can go. Emily, this weekend should be a banner one for the Nittany Lions.
All right. Finally, it would not be a Wiltfong whip-around unless I ask about this next guy. The number 1 running back in the 2024 class, Taylor Tatum, is set to make his college decision on July 21st. We've been anticipating this all summer long. What can you tell us as we are a day away from finding out where he goes?
Well, I talked to his father, Ivan, earlier this week, and he said that he does believe his son has made up his mind. Now he's just letting it marinate to make sure. He doesn't think it will change. But he does think he knows what he's going to do. He's going to contact these college programs on Friday before announcing his college decision. But Oklahoma and USC are the finalists, and I think that the intel continues to favor Oklahoma going into his announcement, from the relationship with DeMarco Murray to the time spent on campus with both the baseball team and the football team. The opportunity to play in the SEC in both sports is very exciting to him. And then Jackson Arnold, another Texas native, their quarterback recruit in the 2023 class. Taylor Tatum already on record predicting a Heisman for Jackson down the road. He thinks that the Sooners are going to do big things with Jackson under center, potentially with him in the backfield. Obviously, he's been to USC a few times. Lincoln Riley's offense, the relationship with that staff, you can't sleep on the Trojans. But I think the intel favors Oklahoma going into Taylor Tatum's decision.
Thank you, Steve. To check out past whip-arounds you might have missed, be sure to subscribe to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. It is time now to reset the recruiting board out west. The top player available is 4-star offensive tackle Isaiah Garcia. You see a few edge prospects on the market, but we're going to get it rolling with the only quarterback you see on this list here. And the good news is we don't have to go far to get the intel, because Blair knows it all when it comes to the West. So let's talk about him. Former Ole Miss quarterback commit Damon Williams. He is the only available quarterback in the top 20. You have him crystal balled to Arizona right now, but what's the latest with his, we'll call it round 2 recruitment?
The Elite 11 finalists is beginning to sort through possible official visits. Nothing has been scheduled yet. Nothing has been set in stone, but it does sound like Arizona will be getting one of those visits. That would be huge for the Wildcats on the heels of getting 5-star edge rusher Elijah Rushing. And, this has been, I think, matriculated. It's been, in a way, simmering for Damon Williams to potentially stay in state. Now, one school that I would keep an eye on is Oklahoma. The Sooners have made contact. I've been told that assistant coach Jeff Levy, who has some experience recruiting the West Coast and the state of Arizona in particular, have been reaching out to Damon Williams about potentially getting him on campus at some point. The interesting thing is they already have an Elite 11 finalist committed, that would be Michael Hawkins, who came off the board 4 months after Damon Williams initially made his decision to commit to Ole Miss. So that's one interesting quarterback domino to track, Emily.
Wouldn't be the first school to have two Elite 11 finalists. Georgia seems to be doing all right with their two quarterback prospects. But let's look at some Utah prospects, starting with the state's top player, four-star offensive tackle, the aforementioned Isaiah Garcia. So USC, Utah, Oregon, and Stanford all got officials, and Stanford actually leads the crystal ball, but you seem to be undecided, Blair. Why is that?
The Cardinal did get the last official visit during the month of June, and they have some buzz, they have some momentum, but I have been told to keep an eye on Oregon and Utah. Oregon has kind of been seen as a childhood favorite school. He loved going out there and meeting with the coaching staff, Coach Terry, the new offensive line coach. Really, the transition from the offensive line coach room has been seamless for Garcia. He loves the Ducks and what they would offer him. And then Utah's the in-state program. His brother actually played for the Utes a couple years ago, and that's a short drive from campus that would give his family a chance to be able to see him every Saturday. So that's the reason I haven't put in a crystal ball prediction yet. I still feel like Utah and Oregon are right there. Stanford does have a lot of the momentum, like I mentioned earlier, but this one's interesting. This one could wind down here in the next couple of weeks. He kicks off his high school season August 11th, and I know he wants to make a decision before he kicks off the season, so that could be in a couple weeks.
Yeah, that's all right. Take your time, Blair. Let's talk about the top defensive player in Utah. Falitau Satuala took visits to both Utah and UCLA, but he's got offers from all over the country. And you actually wrote back in May that the safety may have the highest ceiling of any player in Utah this cycle. That is high praise. What's his recruitment looking like mid-July?
Our scouting guys love multi-sport athletes and players that play multiple positions and a couple different things throughout the year. He plays basketball and lacrosse. Falitau, actually, I got the chance to meet him this spring, and he was on his way to a playoff lacrosse game. So he's a super athletic, really high upside. Frame-wise, recruiting-wise, he did take his official visits in May and in June, made it out to UCLA to kick things off, then rounded things out with Utah and BYU. This sounds like an in-state battle. It's one of those classic Utah versus BYU recruiting battles. And Emily, I'm actually compelled to put in a crystal ball prediction right now for the Utah Utes. So I'm going to pull out my phone. We don't do this very often. It's a special occasion, but I think Falitau Satuala is trending to the Utes, so let me do that now and make it official. Just clicked save prediction. So I think the Utes are in a great spot there. They've been building a relationship with Falitau for such a long time, and if it does come down to those two in-state programs, I like the Utes.
Wow. Okay, so that's all it takes is you just pull out your phone and press the final button, and there it is.
You got to be signed in. That's the only issue,
Oh,
and usually, with the way things are, with double verification and all the passwords that you need to remember, that's basically the biggest hurdle. But that's the thing, right? Sometimes we're out on the field, we're out at a game, we're at the airport. I need to report, and it's right then and there. So I put it on my phone. Crystal ball prediction: Falitau to the Utah Utes.
Wow, Falitau Satuala to Utah. Crystal ball live on the show from Blair. Love to see that. We have one more prospect to talk about. I'm not going to hold you to throwing out a crystal ball for him here live. That was enough drama already. But you got the three-star tight end, Roger Satelepanga. He took an official back in June to Baylor, has one scheduled to Tennessee this fall. He's all over the place. He's also got an offer from Alabama. So what else is on the horizon for him?
I would have zero idea where that crystal ball would be right now because Roger Saleapanga is all over the place, and that's not just his visits. I think he's getting a feel for his recruitment and really, I think, understanding what he likes and what he wants in a program. He's taken multiple visits out to Tennessee to meet up with Nico Iamaleava. He took that official visit to Baylor. He will be back at Tennessee at the end of the year. Alabama is a school that he's really interested in. Actually got a chance to work out for the Crimson Tide and that staff as he connected with Tua Tagovailoa's dad when he was out there in Alabama. He's actually a Southern California native, so he's really intrigued about UCLA as well. That's a school that his grandparents always envisioned him going to, but his recruitment has really expanded. I think the horizons have been a bit more broad in terms of the schools that he's able to go out to. So keep an eye on Oregon, Utah, which is known to develop their tight ends. That being the in-state school for him is also in the mix. I think that Tennessee is in a great spot. Baylor really impressed him, so this one could go a number of ways. This is a player who will take his recruitment down all the way, I think, to the early signing period, and this is one to track for the rest of the recruiting cycle.
All right, you can read more of Blair's work on 247sports.com. And as always, for more exclusive information, become a VIP member today. And speaking of VIP, we got some great guests here in studio in Nashville, Tennessee, where the SEC Media Days wrapping up this week. We have national college football writer Brandon Marcello, national college football analyst Carl Reed. Guys, you heard all the conversation that happened in Nashville this week at SEC Media Days, but Greg Sankey was the first to take the podium and really open things up. And the conversations surrounding NIL I thought were particularly interesting. And there was one soundbite that I think a lot of people are talking about, is that him saying only Congress can adequately resolve these issues when it comes to NIL. Carl, when you hear that, what are the issues that Congress needs to fix?
I think the main issue is that NIL is not turning out, Brandon and Emily, to be what it was intended to be. We were giving these kids an opportunity to come in and make money based on their name, image, and likeness, based on their ability to secure marketing deals. Now we've got this collective deal started, and what collective has been is, let's just call it what it is, guys, it's pay for play. And some teams have larger budgets with their collective groups, some don't. I don't know if they can keep this up, like who has the war chest of the most cash. I think that that's the most pressing issue that has to be addressed, because that's not what this was intended to be.
You're exactly right. And on Friday, we were finally seeing some movement in Congress. Bipartisan bill going to be introduced. They're trying to get it in before the end of August, when everybody takes a break in Washington. And as we know, a presidential election is coming up, so it's going to be hard to get things going. But there's some ideas there that I think that both sides are going to kind of be willing to work on. And number one on all this is some transparency. So there would be a database where at the end of the year, everybody in college football, college athletics would know how much they're being paid. Their players are being paid through other outside collectives or whatever. And also there's some things to protect players. There's a lot of expectation that this will actually be something that gets pushed through in Washington, D.C. There's been about a dozen bills that have been drafted. None of them even reached a committee level. They feel like this is not only going to reach a committee level, but will end up being on a vote maybe by the end of the year. And so we could potentially see something here finally of some regulation coming from the government, but it's Washington, so we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, you said it perfectly. Along those lines, it's going to take a while for this to happen. And, when I heard Greg Sankey say that, I thought to a certain extent it felt like him kind of throwing up his hands and saying, oh, only Congress can fix this. So, Brandon, what do we do in the meantime then?
It's the Wild West, so you just let everything keep going and everybody just keeps complaining into thin air, to the sky, because that's really nothing to do about it.
With the rules in place the way they are, I don't think there's anything you can do. You just have to, it's the survival of the fittest right now. Who can take the rules the way they are now and continue to win with them, because it doesn't look like there's going to be an immediate resolution to how that's being handled.
The NCAA needs more power in this, and Congress is what is going to provide that to them. The NCAA is still the enforcement agency. They do two things well, and then only two things, the NCAA. They run a basketball tournament, which produces billions of dollars, and they can enforce rules and regulations. The problem is everything's so crazy, they're not really able to do so because they're not clear-cut rules on NIL. Congress would provide that and provide them power. In fact, some legal power, and according to this bill, subpoena power, so they can start going after collectives and everything if there's something stinky arising from all this.
Brandon, I got a question for you, though. Why can't the NCAA make a move or a rule on their own? Why do they need Congress? They've shown us over the years before that they have some rules that aren't necessarily against the law. Marijuana being a major issue. We have states that have legalized marijuana, but the NCAA is still suspending kids for failed drug tests. So why are they saying there's nothing that we can do about this from a rule standpoint?
Antitrust exemption. They want an antitrust exemption. They do not want to be in courts and in the legal system getting sued over and over and over again. They already got their butts handed to them a year ago in the Alston case and the unanimous ruling by the Supreme Court. the window is open for that to happen if they were to start enforcing rules that aren't really rules right now. They need Congress to provide them some backing here, and again, some legal avenues, the subpoena power into collectives and everything. That would be really huge for them and allow them to actually police this.
You mentioned the Austin case. There's been a few other cases that have dealt with this idea of these athletes becoming employees, and that was something else that Greg Sankey touched on. He said he hadn't had a conversation with a single student athlete that said they wanted to be an employee. Carl, how much do you think a student athlete understands what that employee-employer relationship actually looks like?
I don't think from a rule standpoint or from a legality standpoint, Emily, that they understand the difference between being an employee and being an amateur. I do think they just want their money. And so they want their money however they get it. And if they got to sign a W-2 for it or a W-9, I don't know that it makes a huge difference to them, but I don't think that they're working with the level of knowledge that maybe Greg Sankey is working with.
Would you interpret when he said that?
Exactly the same way. I think players want the money, but also it's one of those situations when Greg Sankey is asking them, he's also explaining to you, here are what would go into that and what would be required of you. And by the way, you'd be able to be fired on the spot immediately if you don't perform so well. And that's just how it is.
Yeah,
that's the real world.
That doesn't sound attractive when you're getting it presented.
I wouldn't want that.
Way, right?
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of it has to do with control, and then you look into, well, does this mean that there's going to be some sort of collective bargaining that comes in? So It kind of opens a can of worms, and I can understand from a student-athlete perspective why that would, make your mind explode just a little bit. You actually had a separate conversation with Greg Sankey in which you guys talked about this, Division I council proposing to change the transfer portal window, going from that 60-day just chaos fest back in December and January to maybe whittling it down to just 30 days. What can you tell us from that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, the point here is that coaches are going crazy. They want to protect coaches. They also want to protect the players and also try to protect high school recruiting, because high school recruiting in a little bit, the guys that are 3 and 2 stars, they're not getting as much attention in the month of December as they deserve right after their state championship games and while they're going through with that. So Greg Sankey's whole point is we need to shrink the transfer portal window, yes, but we also need to look at the early signing date. When do we do that? What is conducive to make it something that wouldn't necessarily bump into the transfer portal, so that coaches in December, when they're going near the end of the regular season, they're trying and focusing on the high school kids and getting that situated rather than it just being, we got to prepare for the transfer portal. It's November, we have to prepare.
One of the things they did, and you just mentioned it a little bit, Brandon, that ruined it or started to hurt the 2 and 3 stars is when we started the early signing period. That didn't have anything to do with the transfer portal. Coaches wanted to be able to lock up guys sooner because they didn't want to be chasing guys in the month of February. So the early signing period has had some unintended consequences as well. What we're also starting to see in college, a lot of assistant coaches are trying to get into the NFL because they don't want to recruit with this calendar anymore. So you're going to see some of the better recruiters, some of the better position coaches look for NFL opportunities and opportunities to join the professional ranks if they are able to, because they're getting burned at both ends with the recruiting. Because not only the transfer portal window, you're also, while you're recruiting transfer portal guys and trying to evaluate high school guys, having to try to keep your own roster from bailing on you as well.
We do the coaching carousel 24/7 Sports. I keep up with every move that's going on. We had a pretty high number of coaches leaving for the NFL. Everything's anecdotal to a certain extent when you put numbers to it. But look at certain staffs, like a Florida, for example, where you had multiple coaches going to the NFL. There are certain jobs that are getting a little bit more attention. There's a lot more stress involved, and those coaches are leaving for the NFL. And the industry in college football is getting younger. You know what they say, you're younger, you don't know anything because, well, you're dumb, and I'm dumb. When you're a younger guy, you don't know until you know. And so they're getting in these situations, and they're about to find out that they might burn out pretty quick and be out of the industry by the time they're 40.
Yeah, I mean, Florida's a great example of that. Their defensive coordinator, Austin Armstrong, 29 years old, and is a defensive coordinator in the SEC. All right, along the same lines of the coaches, every single head coach hit the podium this week at SEC Media Days. And I'm going to circle in on Jimbo Fisher. It was no surprise that he was going to be asked about the relationship between his new offensive coordinator, Bobby Petrino. Here's what he had to say about who's calling plays this fall.
Guys, coach, have you ever been in any staff room that doesn't have arguments or disagreements? Every coaching staff in America has an argument or a disagreement. That's part of it. But no, it's just, I'm the boss, we're the boss, we'll do it at the end of the day. But you listen to everybody's opinion. Everybody can voice their opinion. I want guys with opinion. I want guys who have knowledge. I want guys who make you think. I want guys to create different narratives that brought to the table that can help us. I think it's the best thing you have, and I think that's one of the reasons, some of the reasons you hired them, to do different scenarios and different things like that. But as far as that, we all have great respect for each other, and it's been tremendous. We've had great response and haven't had any issues.
To quote the great Michael Scott, that is super clearish. Brandon, what did you get from that
Well,
answer?
I asked that question, and I mentioned the word volatile because I thought I would get a response from him, because he's been pretty cool on all this, but you got to get him going. Listen, Bobby Petrino is a fiery guy. Jimbo Fisher's a fiery guy. And a guy who's in that room that we don't talk a lot about, Steve Adazio, is someone who loves to hear his own voice in that room. He's the offensive line coach. There's a lot of personalities here. 3 former head coaches on that staff. Bobby Petrino will call the plays there despite what Jimbo Fisher's doing, whatever he's going to do. But Fisher is going to supersede and come in and do what his own thing at times. Bobby Petrino, though, has never had to answer to anybody other than the voices in his head on game days in 21 years. He has not been an assistant coach since 2002. How is that dynamic going to work? And I can tell you from talking to people inside that building that it's not necessarily volatile right now, but the egos are big and they bump up and brush up against each other. But they are working in earnest. They understand that they got some special players, and they feel like that what they've got with that offense, they're going to be able to score some points. It's just a matter of what happens, say, week 3. They have 3 straight 3-and-outs, and Jimbo's going, Bobby, let me get this drive.
In addition to Bobby not having to have answered to anybody before, Jimbo has called every play for the last 20 years as well as an offensive coordinator, as a head coach. He's never had anybody else calling his offense. When you make these hires and you hire a guy like Jimbo Fisher, when you're Texas A&M, nobody ever looks at the worst possible situation that can happen. Right. And last season, the worst thing did happen. Your offense isn't any good, and so now you're asking a guy who's known for offense and calling plays to bring in somebody like Bobby Petrino. But I am going to tell you guys something. They better figure it out and make it work. If Bobby Petrino is the sole play caller, however they have to work their chemistry together, they have to work, because Texas A&M doesn't pay you $100 million for you not to win and win big. There's some results that they're expecting in College Station this
I'll
year.
say this, his buyout shrinks to about $76 million after this season, Jimbo Fisher. Texas A&M will pay that if they have a losing season. Texas, your big brother, despite no one wants to say that, your big brother is joining the conference next year. You left the Big 12 to get away from them. They're joining. This is an inflection point for Texas A&M football. They will make a decision, money be damned.
Yeah, the same way that coaches don't have to tell us who their starting quarterback is. Jimbo doesn't necessarily have to give that away. But Carl, as a former head coach, what should that dynamic look like between the head coach and the offensive coordinator?
Well, if you're going to have a guy that's going to be a play caller, especially when you go get Bobby Petrino, you're going to let him call the offense. Now, Bobby's going to also have to be able to take some of the things the head coach says or suggests. But if you want a guy to have chemistry and the ability to call plays effectively, you've got to let him do his job.
Talk about the power dynamic shifting in the SEC, bringing in Oklahoma and Texas in the year 2024. But I'm feeling a little movement in the SEC West lately, too. You got Brian Kelly coming in his first season, beating Nick Saban and Alabama and punching their ticket to Atlanta for the SEC championship game. Brandon, was that an anomaly, or what should we expect? Is there a shift, and are we going to see a similar trend in 2023?
I don't know if it's a shift where LSU's replaced Bama, but they've closed the gap with Bama, and I think they're an inch ahead of them right now just because they actually have their quarterback position figured out going into this season. Having said that, I think Alabama is deeper, and they've got some more dynamic players around the quarterback position, especially defensively. Dallas Turner is going to be amazing. I think he's going to end up being the SEC's Player of the Year potentially in a year where the quarterbacks are going down. But LSU, they got to build the depth up. The transfer portal's really helped them the first year under Brian Kelly. There's still not a lot of depth, and there's some concerns I have there on the defense. But man, they might have the best receiving core in the SEC. I love Jayden Daniels. He doesn't get enough love right now. The running back situation's good. I really like LSU this season. The thing, though, is if Bama does find that quarterback and they are dynamic offensively and can push the ball down the field, then Alabama will overtake them. But right now, It's LSU in the West, man.
Every few years we have this conversation, and I knew that Brandon and I would disagree on something today. So LSU, have they closed the gap? Maybe some. When have we seen a team be able to consistently beat Alabama, especially in the SEC West? We've seen them lose a game before. We've seen Bama lose. We've seen teams get really hyped and they lose a game on the last play of the game. But year after year, can you beat Alabama? Can you continue to recruit and retool and reload that roster to say that you're overtaking them in the West? I don't think that anybody has done that with consistency. So I have to stay with Alabama until I see that LSU can consistently beat them year in and year out.
I mean, you look at it on paper and you have kind of a pros and cons list. You see all the question marks that come with Alabama entering this upcoming season. LSU doesn't have that. They're one of two teams that returns their head coach, their starting quarterback, and both coordinators. So how much of this trust in Alabama is just that and based off history and what we've seen from Nick Saban?
Well, it's based on Nick Saban's ability to reload and get the right coaches and pick them, because he's been losing coaches after every single run for years, the head coaching jobs to NFL opportunities, and he has just consistently shown the ability to pick the right guys. And a few times where he's picked the wrong guy, he's corrected those decisions really well. And I think that Tommy Rees is going to be the key for Alabama, and he's a lot better than what everybody thinks he is. He got a hard time at Notre Dame from the fans there, but Tommy Rees is a well-known recruiter. High school coaches really like him, and he's as good as an offensive coach as we have in the country.
And he had to deal with quarterback situation there and injuries in Notre Dame, and he changed the offense a little bit on the fly and got them going, and they finished the season strong. And Nick Saban said he's the smartest young guy he's been around, and that's saying something considering all the great coaches Nick Saban's been around. Alabama, to me, they got to find that quarterback. I think they will. There's someone on campus that's going to be able to deliver the ball downfield for them. They got way too many players around them. My question is if can you do it by week 3, week 4? Or are we going to it like a Coker situation where in week 1, maybe we have our starter, but then we end up making a change of some sort? I think Bama's in that situation. And, you know, I talked to Nick Saban a little bit off to the side. Would you go into the season without naming a starter? And he's like, we're just going to take as long as we have to. As he said, you got to bake the cake, and it's not ready until it's ready.
They've done this before. You just mentioned Coker. They also went this route when they had Phillip Sims and A.J. McCarron until McCarron took the lead. They went in with that situation unsettled. So this is not new territory for Coach Saban. He's been through this before.
Yeah, you take a look at the Alabama schedule, too. It's an easy one, I would say, in week 1, playing Middle Tennessee, but then Texas is coming to town. So you don't have a whole lot of time to be able to figure out what's going to happen with that quarterback situation. But I'm kind of with you, Carl. You just trust that Nick Saban will find a way, and you see all the other talent that is around him. Guys, thank you so much for the great conversations. Throughout the week, myself and Grace Remington sat down with some of our team site experts. They gave us all the intel on everything happening at SEC Media Days. Here are some of those conversations. Jacob Rudner from Swamp 24/7 is here to talk about the future. We're turning the page. Year 2 under Billy Napier. How are things going so far?
I think a lot better. I think that the focus has always been recruiting in these first couple years for Billy Napier. That much wasn't really a secret. This was kind of one of those, you know, it's a team that needed work immediately, and Billy Napier did not shy away from that. They lost a massive percentage of their roster between last season and this season, and they're kind of in that phase right now where it's about putting together what's going to look best maybe 2-3 years down the line. And I don't necessarily think that this is a win now team so much as it is build out for beyond 2023 into 24 and even 25. And they're doing that pretty successfully.
Yeah, so far so good. 3rd ranked recruiting class in the 2024 cycle with still in play for a lot of big commitments in that cycle. What has been the key to success for Napier on the trail?
I think they just really know how to sell the program. This is a staff that is super relatable. You know, with the guys that they're trying to bring in on both sides of the ball, they have several 5-stars already in the class. Jamonte Waller is somebody who really stands out, and it speaks to Sean Chaos's recruiting. Just a guy who really knows how to relate again, and they do such a good job of making guys feel at home. They're showing players, you know, this is why we think you're going to make an impact at Florida, and they're doing something to make them believe that, which is really what I think is the separator between maybe what Florida had in its previous staff and what it has now.
Texas and OU have been dominating Big 12 recruiting over the last decade plus. Now you enter the SEC, where recruiting is, of course, key when it comes to everything that happens in that conference. How have you seen maybe the changes in what's happening on the recruiting trail for Texas as they're now able to say, well, we're joining the SEC? Where has that impact been felt?
Well, the biggest is on the offensive line. I mean, Steve Sarkisian came in. He was hired to match wits with Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma. But Sarkisian was telling people privately, I'm going to build this thing like an SEC team. And that means large human beings. So they've had, I think the 4 kids they signed in the latest recruiting class on the offensive line were all 330 pounds or larger. Mm-hmm. And some of them are much larger. And that's where I think they've changed their profile. And obviously with Steve Sarkisian, they're attracting top-end skill talent, quarterbacks, receivers. A.D. Mitchell transfers from Georgia to Texas after winning 2 straight national championships. So Steve Sarkisian is trying to build this Texas team in the mold of the 2019-2020 Alabama teams that he had with Jaylen Waddle, Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, that kind of speed at receiver. And of course, they won the national championship in 2020. He's very confident. We'll see if all this success in recruiting translates to the field in 2023.
Have you noticed a change in what Venables is doing with Oklahoma recruiting as they now are getting very close to that transition to the SEC?
Yeah, of course, Oklahoma's already been recruiting at an incredibly high level. Venables' first year, they signed number 4 class in the country, number 8 transfer class coming in this last year. But I think that he kind of realizes that he knows that the SEC is a line of scrimmage league. Just because the battles that he had while he was at Clemson, facing some of those top SEC teams in the postseason, and he knows that Oklahoma needs to kind of bulk up there on the defensive front and along the offensive line. You just even look at their most recent transfer that they brought in, Dejon Terry, who started his career at Tennessee. Big guy, last week at a Big 12 Media Days, had Oklahoma players talking about, kind of blown away by just his size and, not wanting to go up against him in drills and practice because, he's a force up there. So if they can get some more guys in kind of that mold and reinforce that line of scrimmage, obviously they've already been able to recruit at a high level, but that'll get them more SEC ready moving forward.
Auburn's current class, though, low in the rankings, probably because they only have 11 commits at this point. However, 9 of those are 4-stars, so pretty good ratio there. But what differences so far are you seeing in the recruiting?
Yeah, similar to what we were just talking about with the roster. There was a ton of work to be done in terms of picking things up on the recruiting trail. Auburn was last in the SEC toward the end of Brian Harson's tenure. Yes, that's below Vanderbilt, which obviously is never good. And he picked things up. I think the biggest thing you can point to in terms of the difference between the closing ability of somebody like Hugh Freeze versus Brian Harsin, they flipped 3 Power 5 commitments at the end of the 2023 class. Committed to Miami, committed to Ohio State, and then the top-rated player in their class, Keldrick Falk, was committed to Florida State. Yeah, you mentioned what Hugh Freeze has done in the past. I believe he had 4 top 15 classes at Ole Miss, so he does have that reputation. It was always going to be difficult for Harsin coming in with his background, or a lack thereof, in terms of an SEC footprint for him, but there's also just the recruiting prowess in terms of what Hugh Freeze brings to the table. Everything we've heard from high school coaches this summer, everything we've heard from parents of recruits being on campus, everybody's doing great in the offseason. Of course, everyone's a winner in the offseason, but there are a lot different vibes in the building right now in terms of their ability to not only get big recruits on campus, but be able to close on them as well. And we'll see coming up as we record this right now. They've got their Big Cat Weekend at the end of July. That's their, everybody's got their big recruiting event that they do in the summer. They're looking at a 5-star Alabama commit, Perry Thompson, who's a receiver, a 5-star Georgia commit at linebacker, DeMarcus Riddick. We think they've got a pretty good chance to flip both of those guys. Obviously, we'll see what happens there. But anytime you're in those conversations, that you've improved on the recruiting trail. And I believe they're 7th in terms of average right now. You mentioned all the 4-stars that they've got in the class right now. So the feeling is that once they start to pick things up in terms of volume, in terms of their commitments, that they'll be able to jump back into that top 15 recruiting range that they're used to.
Massive thank you to all of our team site reporters for coming through the studio this week. It was such a treat to see you all in person. Love the Zoom calls, but this was way better. So for more coverage of your team, make sure you are checking out these great team sites. You got Swamp 24/7, Sooners Illustrated, Horns 24/7, and Auburn Undercover. You hear that sound, you know what it means. Just because there is no college football recruiting show over the weekend, it does not mean that the recruiting world stops. So it is time to mark your calendar. We have a trio of big commitments this weekend on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. First, it's four-star defensive lineman Liam Andrews. He's at Friday at 11 a.m. And then four-star wide receiver Jaime Ffrench is at 2:45 on Saturday. Then on Sunday, four-star linebacker Kyngston Viliamu-Asa will announce his decision at 5 o'clock. Blair, do we anticipate any surprises this weekend? If so, where's it coming from?
I think Kyngston Viliamu-Asa will surprise someone. All three schools have felt really good about the physical linebacker at various points in this process, and for good reason. And there are no crystal ball predictions in, Emily, so this one could go either way, and I think it speaks for itself when I say that someone will be surprised.
Okay, talking season continues with Media Days, so keep it locked in to your favorite team site for Pac-12 Media Days. That's tomorrow live from Las Vegas, and then the Big Ten will take over next week on Wednesday and Thursday from Indy. What are you hoping to learn from these?
It's a shame that Deion Sanders won't be at Pac-12 Media Day in Las Vegas as he recovers from another leg surgery. But I think when you think about the Big Ten, I'm excited to hear from the new coaches, right? What would Matt Rule say? What is his biggest recruiting pitch going to be? What will Luke Fickell say about the process at Wisconsin and how they're recruiting? I think those are the things that I'm looking at, especially as we move into conference realignment and how things could shift for all these coaching staffs when they focus in recruiting.
Yeah, lots of new coaches in these two media days. We'll see what they have to say. Meanwhile, visits opening back up on Tuesday. It's technically called the quiet period, which means that interactions have to take place on college campuses. But Blair, what are you keeping an eye out for as the dead period ends?
We just saw Dan Lanning, a photo of him in the last shot. I think Oregon is one that I'm looking at because they host a big event at the end of July every year. It's called Saturday Night Live. They are number 10 right now nationally in the composite team recruiting rankings. That's a school that needs to make a push heading into the season. They've been taking some hits on the recruiting trail, so will they end the summer with a bang? That's the one I'm looking at next week.
All right, I'm sure that we will be talking about all of this, but we're going to shift gears and answer some of your viewer questions. You've been sending them in fast and furious. Let's start with JBH asking, how close do you think five-star defensive lineman Williams and Nwaneri is with his decision?
It could be very close. You know, reading the tea leaves and reading the reports, especially the one over at our Oklahoma site, Sooner Illustrated, by the one and only Colin Kennedy, it sounds like he could be close to making a decision, maybe at that first week of August. Williams and Nwaneri loves Oklahoma. That's obviously a school that has one of the crystal ball predictions right now. Georgia has made this really, really tight. Missouri can't be counted out. But it sounds like this could be wrapping up here in the next week or two, or at least that's the target date. And if things extend out and if they drag out a little bit more, then, you know, we might be in here for a kind of a tight battle, a dogfight. And I think Williams and Nwaneri wants to decide before he starts preparing for his senior season.
We always talk about leverage and how fast you need to commit. He is somebody that's got leverage in bunches and can wait as long as he wants to make his decision. Alvin wants to know, where are you leaning for four-star wide receiver Gatlin Bair out of Idaho after setting a commitment date for the 5th?
This one is surprising because, remember, Gatlin Bair is that prospect that intends to take a 2-year church mission, so he should be in no hurry. He has no reason to make a decision early on, but what this tells me is that whatever school he's chosen or whichever one he's decided on probably wants a little bit of buzz. And right now, everything that we've heard out west, and particularly what our guy Brandon Huffman has heard, is that Michigan and Boise State are the two realistic top contenders and suitors at the top of the list right now for Gatlin Bair. I know Oregon's been there. He's a huge track star, and it's Tracktown USA, and you can never count out the Ducks for a player of his caliber, especially a dual sport athlete like Gatlin Bair. But Michigan has been the school that has been getting a ton of the buzz in recent months. And then Boise State, right? Gatlin Bair is a player from the state of Idaho, perhaps the best thing from Idaho since potatoes. And that would be a home run hit and a huge win for the Broncos if they were able to land him.
That may be your hottest take. I am a big fan of potatoes. Anyway, you serve them up, fries, twice baked, au gratin, anything. But that's high praise for Mr. Gatlin Bear. What about?
I put Gatlin Bear up there with tater tots.
Wow, he must be pretty good. I'm so bummed that we're not going to see him play for a while, though. But man, that is some high praise for Idaho products, I will call them. Samuel asking any intel on where Auburn stands with 4-star offensive lineman DeAndre Carter out of Mater Dei.
Really, really thickly in the mix, I would say. He took an official visit already in the month of June, also made it out to Michigan State. Those are the two schools that he, I think, really likes. And he told our Greg Biggins that he was surprised on that Auburn visit. I think he was caught off guard. I don't know if he went into that trip expecting something and got something else, but he was blown away by the Tigers. And they missed out on Preston Taumua, especially when you think about offensive line targets out west. Auburn doesn't go out west very often, but they've gone out west a couple times in this cycle trying to get one. DeAndre Carter is high on that list for the Tigers. He likes the Spartans. He is going to take an official visit to Texas as well, so you can't count out the Longhorns. But I would think that Auburn is right in the thick of it there for that Mater Dei offensive lineman.
All right, I have no more questions. Just a really awesome statement. The number one safety in the class will be committing live with us here in a couple of weeks. KJ Bolden, mark your calendars for August 5th at 7:30 p.m. You see his finalists there, the best of the best in college football. So excited to see where KJ Bolden lands, and you will find out live on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. A few housekeeping notes real quick. We are taking our own little quiet period next week, so we will not have any shows next week. We'll see you back here July 31st. And one more thing, yes, Blair's gonna take a nice nap and so well rest before the season starts. I also want to say a little pre-congratulations to our producer, Chris, who is about to welcome his second child on Monday. We will miss you for the next month, but very excited for you and your growing family. For Blair Angulo, I'm Emily Proud, and this is the College Football Recruiting Show.